Joining me is Tony Wan from the US. Tony, welcome, and thanks for accepting my invitation.
Thanks for having me.
Tony, let's begin by talking a bit about everyone's favorite subject, right? Talking about themselves, but I'll try to correct you as much as possible. We were being too modest, so please go ahead.
It's actually one of my least favorite things to talk about. But briefly on me was so career-wise, started half of my life is starting off in nonprofits, working for a lot of different places to mainly connect people with resources, and people who need work done in developing countries, everything from clean water to AIDS and malaria hospitals, etc. Jumped into gaming it's about 13 years now. And started off my gaming career on the production side. So actually as a producer, leading teams of devs and designers and artists to make mobile games. I worked for Gameloft for a short stint. And then I went off and did my own thing for a couple of years, did my own mobile game startup, sold that off, joined another company, did both social, read Facebook gaming back in the day, together with mobile gaming. And really did that for a number of years. We eventually sold that company as well. And then I wanted to see if my ideas would scale. So I joined Riot Games later on. And then I would eventually join Epic, working on some little things here and there. And currently I'm flying solo. I started a consultancy, and also I would say it's combined with being able to build remote teams if you would need any kinds of outsourcing to supplement your business in video games.
That's quite a complex matrix of services there, Tony, and it's quite a story going from working with public institutions, NGOs, having companies which are built from scratch and then sold, then working for major gaming producers, and eventually ending up as a consultant to which hopefully the executives listen, so they can build better teams and more productive and more efficient and more employee centric kind of cultures over there. But I think this polarity of roles would not be complete without emphasizing a bit on your education and the values that you grew up with and became familiar, and actually introducing them in your practice, and which is part of the reason why we're having this conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. So born and raised in the Silicon Valley, eventually went to university down in San Diego. So I was at UCSD, graduated from there. After that, I went into seminary at Westminster West, we call it, and I got my MDiv there. And then after that, I got my master's in political management, political science, then emphasis on advocacy. So that's kind of my educational background.
Being a huge fan of the Stoics myself, there are many occasions in which I try to bring this current or lessons learned or passed on for thousands of years in current management tips and tricks or current management scenarios that I have to face. But I gotta say, those books over there, they can really stand the test of time, and even today, there's so much gold into them. So what struck me from initial conversation, my first interaction with you, was your approach towards building teams, to managing teams, to building businesses, and it was very human centric. So I want to talk a bit with you about this part. Is it an advantage or a disadvantage to actually build businesses in a human centric way?
I think it's a really good question. I think the way that you weigh it, whether it's advantage or disadvantage, really depends on your own personal perspective. If you are someone who is only trying to narrowly, let's say, optimize for short-term P&L, it might not be a great strategy. But if you are somebody who is more concerned with building a legacy, a long-term legacy, if you're somebody who really wants to have a great company, if you're somebody who actually cares about how uh, your company provides opportunities for the human beings that work at it, then I think it provides very, very clear advantages for the long run. Just off the top of my head,
Hmm.
I think there are arguments to be made for what I would call hidden efficiency gains because we don't tend to measure, we don't set up our business management metrics to capture the value provided, for example, of tenured employees and the cost of not having to retrain whenever you hire new people. Um, we don't really count the cost of that. I've never seen that calculation at any single one of my large corporate partners that I've contracted through the years. Whenever I ask the question, there's a non-answer. It's just not captured in the data. It's not something that people are paying attention to, right? There's no there's no measurements around the value of having homegrown upper level senior management in your company and how much that saved you from your executive recruiting costs and hiring bonuses and signing bonuses and hiring from the outside with inflated salaries, etc., because you had to beat out the competition versus growing somebody internally. You don't; these things aren't talked about, but they
Hmm.
exist. And so, if you are curious enough, I believe you could measure very clearly what the financial advantages to a company are. But you have a lot of people out there, maybe like Warren Buffett, who will look at the quality of the management of a company and really look at, let's say, a couple of key moral behaviors and to see if a company is really being run well or not. And they make their investments appropriately. And so I think again, this is very much on the surface, but even on the surface, there's certainly clear long-term value, um, and in terms of managing or doing business this way, building businesses this way.
Very interesting, and I think you caught a fan over here of Warren Buffett and his style and his way of staying away from everything that is viral or on a trend, and
Hmm.
going against the wave with this kind of mentality that if the management is right with a bit of help and some levers over there, it can actually flourish. But you said a couple of things. I want to get back to them, and then I want to deep dive a bit in the industry in which you are, so we can explain to the folks listening to us or watching us what exactly is characteristic of your industry. So, number one, I think you are 1,000%, not 100% sure and correct from my point of view. What you're saying that this does not come out of the P&L conversation, people, tend to look at improving EBITDA from, lowering or keeping salary costs low or office
Yeah.
costs low or going into a more cost feasible geography from a labor cost point of view. But they completely ignore the ratio of employee cost versus employee revenue, where attrition actually kicks in. So because it's under EBITDA and it's a small detail, it's usually completely misread or ignored. So this is just to have a bit of a joke over here on top of
Yeah,
what you
no,
said.
I agree. I love what Charlie Munger said about EBITDA. I won't repeat it exactly, but he said, whenever you hear that term, think of BS earnings or something like that. It's hilarious. You can find a clip on YouTube. It's really funny.
Yeah, we already miss Charlie, unfortunately, but there's so much we can learn from both Warren and Charlie. And you know what, guys, is very customizable to your industry. So if it worked for them, it's gonna work for your business also. And coming back a bit to this being an advantage or a disadvantage, right? Because in your past, you've worked with companies of different size, different mentality. I've seen executives of different mentality. I've seen people for which numbers matter more than feelings. There's no consideration of aspects like attrition or churn. There's always the sense that we can easily find folks if they want to leave, which is very sad, which is a tendency that I'm seeing. But there are also exceptions. So let's deep dive now into your industry because I want folks to understand and be aware of what is the difference between customer support and the similarities over there between customer support and player support and building a community, because this is actually right your strong suit over there for the gaming industry. And I want to know, how can Tony help my gaming business?
Yeah, sure. So, some of the similarities between customer service and player support, and there are a lot. I mean, you have the overall or overarching goals of making sure that your customers, and in our case, both paying and non-paying players, are well taken care of, that whatever issues they have with your product are being addressed, that you know that the brand is protected during these communications and strengthened if possible, which is
Mm-hmm.
always possible, I think. Um, and to make sure that people have positive impression of the company, that they do, repeat purchases. I mean, business is fairly simple but very difficult to do. It's and the most simple way of thinking about business, I think, is you're trying to get customers and then you're trying to keep them. And so our teams are really focused on understanding our customers in an effort to try to keep them. And it's marketing and publishing and all the user acquisition stuff that those teams who are trying to get people in the door, and the game itself and the arts are core to the entire thing. The most important part. So I don't want to de-emphasize that at all. But we support the people who are continually revising the product, the service, the video game. Um, and we give them, I would say, if my teams are doing their job appropriately, we're giving them a very robust and comprehensive view of what their players are saying, but more importantly, what they're actually doing in the games, so that they can think about what's the best way for them to respond, or to, in some cases, anticipate.
So basically, it's like a loop, right? You've pushed the product out there on the market so that consumers can start using it. We start monetizing on it, and then we get feedback from our users, which we eventually turn towards our developers and say, look, if you enhance this feature, add this feature, or remove this, or improve this, we might have more users and eventually be able to monetize more. And I think this is a huge difference between the two industries that we're representing in this conversation, and we just explained the difference between them because the pressure of monetizing is extremely severe in your industry and adds a lot of pressure. And in this case, how you as a leader, how do you counterbalance that? How do you protect your teams? How do you slice and dice this kind of pressure so that it's manageable for others, so that the overall mission is achieved?
Sure. So the question really is, how do I build these teams? Just want to be clear.
Yeah. How do you help the teams as a leader deal with the pressure? that is out
Okay,
there
the
because
pressure
in
of
this
the
industry
stress.
you need to monetize.
Yeah, um, I I think it's interesting. I think personalities take pressure differently. For me, I don't. I guess it's a little bit unfair because for me, I don't tend to necessarily worry too much. Like the pressure never really bothered me, but I think for my team, like it depends where the pressure is coming from. For some people, especially if they're new and the project blows up or it gets big, one thing I've heard a lot of people ask me about is imposter syndrome. And
Mm-hmm.
so they feel this internal pressure from themselves that they're
Mm-hmm.
not, you know, feelings range from not feeling good enough to, wow, like I've never dealt with anything this big before, to, wow, this is a lot of responsibility. And I think taking on responsibility has been one of the challenges that you have in modern day workplaces. A lot of you have this you have these two things pulling in opposite directions. One is young people feel like in order to get ahead, they might have to, because it's a social media age, they might have
Mm-hmm.
to oversell themselves, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then it's like, oh well, everyone does that, so whatever. And so you have this pressure to oversell your stuff or to self-aggrandize because that's the culture, that's the popular culture. And then, so what happens is maybe you don't spend enough time in the details as you've worked your way up. And maybe you got promoted to a position of responsibility, and that's really scaring you because um, now it's on the line, and your name's on the line, right? And you're not quite
Marketing is
sure
on
what
the
to do.
window. You have to walk the walk now.
Yeah, you have to walk the walk, and helping people with that struggle to come to a place of truth, to admit to themselves and to me and to their colleagues that what do you not know, what do you not really understand,
Mm-hmm.
and then being comfortable with that, and then saying, well, what is it that you do understand, and then also being very comfortable talking about that, because then when you say, well, I'm good at X, there's a there's truth to it. You feel completely comfortable and confident because it's actually true. Versus, yeah, you're pretending to be good at X, and you might have watched some videos, but you actually haven't handled anything yourself in this particular area. And so I think that's like one of the most common ones that I see.
Mm-hmm.
Another one I think would be the fact that, especially with a creative enterprise, and this is for seasoned people who still deal with the stress, even though you know what you're doing, even though you're smart, even though your math is excellent, um, your problem solving skills are so solid, you've done a million things in the past. There is an element whenever you're doing something that's creative where you really don't know what's going to happen, how people are going to receive a creative, production, let's say. There's plenty of artists in the world who didn't get famous until after they died, right? It's really terrible. It's like sucks for them, but it's kind of like, in a way, it showcases the strange humor in artistic endeavors, and that sometimes it doesn't make sense right away to mass audience where you can actually make money from it, right? And video games are much more a mix, a blending of art and science than people like to admit, which frustrates accountants to no end, because they want predictability, they want repeatability, etc. Whatever you were taught in business school, you want those things. It's like, how can I have a low to zero risk, repeatable, positive return on my money? It's like,
Don't answer that question because you have higher
yeah,
chances of winning the lottery.
yeah, exactly, right. And so it's just like, well, but then people try to satisfy these people, right? Because they hold the reins of power, so to speak. And so you're beholden to, you make some projection and half of it's BS or whatever. But that's kind of the pressure. And I would say to resist the pressure, for me, it's really about that first element about the truth for yourself, working that out internally. And at the same time, as you continually do that, because I think you always have to be doing that, working out the truth for the business. And
Mm.
how many times where I've had these conversations and people don't want to hear the truth of the analysis. They'd rather you paint them a rosy picture. And if you want that kind of a consultant who's not going to actually help your company or help you produce better results, like, don't hire me. I'm not in the business
It's
of like justifying whatever it is that you already decided pre-data that you want to do, but that's how a lot of people operate, and that's just the sad truth of a lot of the business world, which is why you get these terrible projections and then results in actions and then layoffs because they were all wrong.
I think there are some golden statements that I've extracted from what you just said, and the answer is split between dealing with, let's say, rookie or more beginners type of employees over there, or at a more entry level, and the seasoned one, maybe mid or more experienced. And bottom line is, with the first case, you actually got to help them identify their strong suits and make sure that they bring added value by using those and quickly identifying what they're lacking so that skill can be sharpened or be compensated by someone else in the team. And B, for the ones with gray hair and some experience, I think we need more to coach them in actually understanding that some of this pressure is built by them because there's no such thing as predictability or exact predictability. And it could be better in certain industries, could be worse than others. Maybe it has to do also with the economic cycle that we're encountering or the seasonality. But
Yeah, there's plenty of things outside of our control, right?
yeah,
Within any company, plenty of things outside of our control, and
but
getting
yeah,
people to acknowledge that is really hard, especially in the West.
yeah, but it's also a key element you mentioned over there. It's about seeing not what you want to see or hearing not what you want to hear, but looking at facts, looking at the truth, accepting the truth, biting that bullet, and trying to do something constructive with it. Now, uh, I think we can both laugh. That's why I think why we that's why we laughed when I made the statement. Executive listening to you, right? As a consultant, and we know that that's not the case all the time. Even if we have all the data or the analytics, all the experience, and we're trying to guide them in a certain direction. Executives know best because they have their own way of looking at things. So Tony, coming back a bit of uh, at your profession and at your role, so help me narrow this down to a couple of lines. Basically, I call you if I have a product that is ready to be launched out there in the gaming industry, and for which I'm trying to build a pool of fans and increase that and monetize on that, but not just a one time kill, but repetitive purchases. And at the same time, being an ambassador for the voice of the direct user, that customer, so I can bring bottom up feedback to the developers in improving that product. Is this correct, Tony?
Yeah, yeah, that's certainly one of the kind of you know, customer journeys that I would say that previous people have gone through with me. I would also say, that could branch off into a number of things, whether it's, advice on even if you're up and running already. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of the larger corporations or larger game companies tend to have, with very large organizations, a lot of inefficiencies built in. You need to optimize your operating costs, figure out, what's real, what's providing real value to you, what's not, what's a better model for you to operate on. If you need supplementary outsourcing, you need specialized a team of let's say white glove or VIP services, or you need, let's say, someone to, uh, because in a lot of cases, the people in player support, let's say for example, player support or community management roles or trust and safety roles, they don't have anybody, an executive above them that
Mm-hmm.
has hands-on experience that can actually help them mature and grow with the company. And so they're really getting kind of the short end of the stick when it comes to mentorship, because there's nobody out there to really help them, sharpen their practical skills, and level up, let's say. And so I think that's an important thing that I can provide as well. I've done it for a number of people outside of my own company, just in the community for years now. But people have encouraged me, like, hey, you should totally like offer this as a service. So that's something that's available as well. So, pretty much whatever it is that you're doing for your live service game, whatever your live operations strategy is, you can. I'm kind of known for being able to scrutinize and find value in helping teams optimize how they actually operate, and it can even help you with the way that you're thinking about evaluating your outsourcing partners, etc. So providing the teams itself, helping you keep your teams accountable, helping you restructure, helping you organize, helping you plan from day one. Early on planning, because you don't need a full time person. You just need someone you can ping ad hoc or during your milestones to help with key development decisions. You do all that.
I think you touched a very sensitive topic because I don't think in my life I've ever seen a more vanilla process than picking outsourcing partners. Now, if I take the first 100 out there, their PowerPoints look the same, their
Yep.
numbers look the same,
Yes.
the haircut of their sales executives with which I'm interacting look the same. Uh, and their prices are the same. So
Yes.
what on God's name are we actually doing here, Tony? How are we actually churning and trying to put our money where our mouth is in terms of actually selecting this best vendor or outsourcing partner for us? And thanks for bringing this in the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, vendor selection, I think, is really, really in a sad state for, at least in my industry, for most video game companies. From what I've seen, even from very, very experienced colleagues, whenever I've been asked to, let's say, help out another department within the game publisher or studio, it's really there's like, they just do a few calls. They like ask a standard set of like short questions. If you're lucky to even get them on a call, they only have a couple of calls with whoever is people know within the company, or maybe their friends know. And then there's really not like a whole lot of thoughtful criteria. And yeah, like the brief is like actually like super duper brief. Maybe it's like 2 pages long. Or there's like not really a ton of work put into it, which is why a lot of places tend to hire procurement folks as their businesses grow. But even those procurement folks are very far removed from the work that needs to be done. A lot of them might not even have done procurement for video game production before, or for live service, outsourcing services
Are you
for
trying to say that this is different from buying car parts?
yeah, very, very different, right? And so, it's still, I would say, from the majority of the industry, fairly immature process. Maybe they don't even do an RFP, and then they just kind of have these very loose conversations, and then they just kind of pick someone who they kind of believe the most, that they think can provide the most, based on a few key perceptions that may or may not be correct. And so it's really a perception game, right? Which is why a lot of the stuff, the traditional sales tactics, generally all look the same. And you just gotta convince someone to sign up, and yeah. So the process is really muddled right now. I would much prefer. I mean, you've seen mine, um, and it's different. I think the shortest one I've ever written is like 40 some pages long.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's part of why we, again, coming back to our conversation, why I wanted to have this podcast with you, because it was really standing out there, and I think people underestimate the scrutiny research and vetting that needs to go through this entire process to get the most viable and reliable outsourcing partner there for us. Look at the contractual values. We're looking at 10 million, 15 million, 20 million over the 2 or 3
yeah,
years. This is not an easy thing to move over in case you're missing, or things are going completely south with this, or our partner does not deliver uh, as expected, right? But
correct.
but Tony, I'm seeing companies and managers and executives failing at even a smaller test. So I would say this is a big test, right? This is like a
Mm,
professional marriage. You're gonna be my professional wife or husband to help me achieve my KPIs. So you better walk the walk. Well, let's transfer the analogy of an RFP, which, by the way, I'm not here to praise you in any way or have any marketing affiliation program for your programs. But I gotta say, it was pretty cool lecturing those 40 pages, and it really helped me understand what you're looking for. Um, and I'm sorry I had to give that price, but it was part of the premium of what you were looking for. So now,
right, right.
so now going back at the analogy I wanted to make, I'm going to a very small exercise, a very easy kind of low hanging fruit exercise in which we extrapolate or minimize the idea of an RFP to a JD.
Hmm.
So I talk with executives and say, I am not able to find that kind of liaison or buffer between me and my delivery team, or between me and my sales team.
Hmm.
And I ask him or her to actually take 2 days to write what they're expecting from that person from all angles. After 2 days, they call me that they would need another three. After 5 days, they say that it's 75% finished. And I leave them for about another week, and then they say, my God, I didn't even know that I was expecting this kind of thing from the person coming to work with me until I actually took this exercise, right?
Hmm.
So I'm giving this example as an analogy because this is how important it is for us to actually be explicit and express our wishes and expectations so that the other can deliver. Otherwise, the other one is like dead men walking. They won't be able to
Yeah.
deliver because they don't know your expectations. So just want to make this side bracket. But now to come back to how we choose this kind of partner for us, that this professional marriage. So you're the godfather here, Tony. So how do we find a bride for someone to succeed from an outsourcing point of view?
Are we talking about like like individual JDs?
No, I'm talking. I'm going back to your RFP example, and right
Okay.
now, the process of selecting an outsourcing partner for our company.
Yeah. So some recommendations I have along those lines is, and echoing a lot of what you said, it's a very serious thing. We use a lot of game companies tend to use the term partnership,
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit. but then I think tend to lack a little bit on the delivery of an actual partnership. And some of the things I think that would help people in selecting a vendor is understanding, probably the first thing is just understanding how they actually get work done. Because if you understand how a company gets work done, you actually understand a lot more about the culture than any cultural presentation of whatever bullet points is going to give you. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's important that you share your own culture or your own aspirational culture and what it is that the company is aiming for. And every single vendor is going to try to do a correlation with their own stated internal values to see how it matches up. But the real culture for me is found
Mm-hmm.
within how do you execute? How do you get work done? How are people promoted? How do you do your performance management? How do you do PIPs if they're needed? Unfortunately, in every place they're needed. How do you offboard people? Right. So that entire process of I would say the employee life cycle. Whether if you're hiring agents, what's the customer service agent life cycle? If you're hiring moderators, what's their life cycle? And really understanding how the vendor executes across all of that, because that will tell you the reality of the culture for the employees, which are who you're going to be working with from a day-to-day basis, and the organization itself to see there should be a lot of alignment, but nothing's ever going to be perfect. But it can't be. It's two different companies.
Mm-hmm.
So in the areas where it's unaligned, you have to do an evaluation to see how much friction am I going to have because of, let's say, these are the 10 things I care about. These three definitely don't match.
Mm-hmm.
But how much friction are those three going to cause in the lifetime of what's hopefully a long-term relationship? Um, and you really do have to scrutinize that to see if there's possible ways to work around and to be upfront with the people that you're negotiating with to see that, hey, these are what I've identified as friction points. I know you're going to tell me what I want to hear, but I don't want to hear that. I want practical measures and plans to how we're going to address these three different points because they will cause friction. So that's actually challenging the vendor to see if they could. So every vendor says that they want to customize for their client, but how far are you willing to go, right? And I think that that's really important is to make that concrete. Don't leave it up in the air, because if you do, what's going to happen is the vendor's just going to run the way that they know how to run things, and it might be fine for those 7 areas, but for the three, it absolutely causes you problems, and you never really work that out in detail. And so, to be fair to the vendors, the clients have also got to be very cognizant of the differences and not just kind of blow over the details. You really do have to scrutinize, and you do have to work out and negotiate across company lines, which is very, very hard, a different way of doing business when it comes to working with you as a client. And if you're not going to constantly pay attention to those and constantly maintenance them, because anything that doesn't get maintenance deteriorates as people shuffle in and out of the organization, and partners, they might change business ownership, right? They might get bought out. They might have a different CEO who decides a whole bunch of things that have downstream effects. So you really do have to pay attention to that. And I would say that's probably the most the key thing in the mix. And then depending on your other priorities, I mean, cost is always going to be a factor, sure,
Yeah.
but to understand, the cost structure as much as possible, and to be able to be upfront about the pressures that, if you are a client that you have, and to understand the pressures that they have, that your potential partners have on price. And they might not be they might not share every single detail,
Mm-hmm.
But even if I would say to the vendors, even if you don't share every single detail, you need to have um, more of an open conversation about what that is, so that your potential client or your current clients understand what's happening on your side. So we're talking about partnerships, and that financial pressure is also something you need to be very cognizant of. So the culture, how things actually get done, the way business is conducted, the cost structure of things. Um, I think all of that's super duper important, and how the employees feel. I mean, the actual employees themselves. That tends to bother me. If I see a lot of negative reviews online, I'm always going to ask about it. And the kinds of answer I receive will tell me if the
Mm-hmm.
people really care or if they're just giving me the company line.
Yeah,
Um,
I was, just visualizing what you were saying, and on top of this, I was just, you know, trying to add a few things from my experience. And I think, as a general rule of thumb, if I were to be a CEO, I would put a rule that no one can work in sales if they didn't have experience in delivery or operations. That is,
yeah,
that is something that I've seen. It's been 10 years now since I've seen this backfire, and I can see it. I continue to see it backfire. And this is not only at sales; it can be also at procurement. Um, so if you don't have this component, you're gonna make there's some promises. You're gonna be tempted to make some promises, especially since you're on a commission over there.
yeah,
Uh, to be that will be quite challenging for your colleagues in delivery to implement, or you might be unaware of some of the backfires that you will generate over there.
yeah. And there's no penalty for sales either, right? Because once
That
the
was
contract is
frustrating.
signed,
That was frustrating.
yeah,
I thought it was just one company. Then I thought it was just one culture. But then I saw that sales, gets away with anything as long as they
yes.
bring the clients over there. So it was very frustrating for me to discover this. But
There's
that's
no accountability. Yeah, there's no organizational accountability for sales in
yeah,
this space.
that should be something, or at least the skin in the game should be for the CEO. They trust these guys to land these jobs. Um, yeah, then there should be some skin in the game over there. So that was
Yeah.
number one. Number two that came in mind was the cultural factor. I think this was severely neglected in many occasions, and by cultural factor, I don't necessarily mean merely the cultural differences, but also the legislative differences,
Mm,
especially when it comes with labor law and working during holidays and family work life balance. And attrition issues and that stuff. And last but not least was the client sentiment. Now, I haven't met yet a client asking for a split client sentiment depending on geography. Depending on how they are actually building the team with that outsource partner. Because you can get client sentiments from the US, which will be great. Cool.
yeah.
Okay. But you're building a 24/7 business, global business with 25 languages, right?
Mhm.
So if it's okay in US, that doesn't mean it's not going to backfire globally. So yeah, that those were the ideas that came to my mind. I said I gotta share them with Tony and see what he thinks about these aspects.
So those are all correct. I mean, that US centric one is a huge problem for a lot of our companies here in the US. And I say this as an American, it's a little embarrassing for me, because it's so painfully obvious in the way that we develop games and the way that we do community events. And there's not enough consideration when you have a global player base of oh yeah, this event is at a reasonable time in the US, but it's like 2 a.m. for somebody else. And they're gonna miss out, on the ability to get whatever cool stuff because they're gonna be sleeping, for a majority of the time or whatever it is. And so you have things like that that are pretty common. One of the things I used to laugh at because I was leading an EU team before. The way they used to talk to us was like the EU was like one country, and I'm like, no, 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 no. Like I have 14,
Yeah.
15 languages to manage.
Yeah.
I know you have one, but like my situation is a bit different out here.
I don't want to
Um,
sound special, right?
yeah, yeah. But it's very interesting how this plays out in big and small ways. So for sure, all of that, and all the labor law stuff. And here's another point. Like I think together with that, you mentioned work-life balance. There's a lot of concern for that for internal folks at video game publishers and studios. We always talk about crunch and burnout.
Hmm.
And every company is trying in its own way to reduce that, because it's really really too much sometimes. But sometimes I've seen certain companies not take the same approach to their vendor partners, and that bothers me as well. It's like, no, no, if you're gonna tell them that they're an extension of your team or that's what you want, you should treat them in a similar manner, with the same kind of consideration and respect, right? And so sometimes I think that's missing from the equation as well, which is unfortunate. And trying to make that clear across lines that, hey, we want to treat our employees this way, and what do you think about that? And does that match with how you do things as a vendor? And to make that explicit, again, if nothing's explicit, if you say in general that you want to help people or that you want to be a good business partner, but you never articulate it, it's never down in writing somewhere, and you don't talk about it ever outside of those high level meetings, it's not going to be real. It's just not.
Yeah. Um, I was just thinking, based on what you said, that you're kind of in the sweet spot between pre-sales and post-sales at any company that we would actually go. And I think it's still a pioneer in this direction because everyone cares about the sale, right? Selling,
Yeah.
putting out there. But what happens before someone decides to make a purchase or after someone has made a purchase and them becoming the ambassadors for that product? I think it's sometimes I think there's no capacity or maturity there out there on the market for us to actually think of this as being equally important with selling the product, or even more important in some cases. And you being in this position, which are the top skills do you think you need to actually be successful in this role?
Sure. Number one, I would say being a really fluent communicator is going to help you, whatever role that it is. I think communication as a general skill is,
Hmm.
excuse me, super downplayed. Very, very important because you have tons of stakeholders. You're going to be able to communicate well with every single one of them. You need to learn how to speak their language so that you can present information in a way that's going to land for each and every one of those different groups. So whether it's a group of devs, do you know your entire company's tech stack for the game? Do you know the backend tech stack? Do you know how everything connects and flows and works? So just that kind of communication, and then that, together with that, a good general knowledge. You don't have to be a software developer, but you should have a good general knowledge of, you know, how what stuff is and how it all connects, right? Do you know what a webhook is? Do you know what APIs are? Do you know how what a data lake is? Do you know how all this stuff connects? Do you know what a data warehouse is? Like, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all these things that you should have a decent working knowledge of. How does stuff actually work? Um, And then I would say beyond that knowledge and those communication skills, uh, really a solid understanding of basic statistics. I can't tell you how often I've seen data abused in meetings, even at the very highest levels in the company, where people are pulling out data and telling whatever stories that they want. And I hate to be that guy, but once in a while I'll just, not every time, but once in a while I'll just stick up my hand and be like, "Where'd you get that? And what is this?" And or I'll be like, "It actually doesn't say that." And so it's a good working knowledge of statistics and learning how to pull good inferences from statistics. I think that's an additional skill because you could pull the wrong inferences from data. So really important, especially in our day and age, if you're working in business, you got to have a handle on stats and what they actually mean, because these days everyone's getting fooled by the way stats are presented, the way data is presented. You see it in the news, you see it in our general culture, you see it on social media, and you see it in the workplace, right? There's tons of data abuse in the workplace. To sometimes I believe it's like, "Oh, I didn't know that at all." It's like, well, yeah, people were presenting like data to you, but they were presenting it in a way that was deceptive, right? Instead of showing you the truth. And so sometimes I'm the bearer, well, many times I'm the bearer of quote unquote bad news. But I think for me, I'm very positive. I think you turn anything around, but
It's not
you
bad
have to
news,
deal
but
with
you're
deal with
cutting down.
reality.
Yeah, you're cutting down through your job. It's your role to cut down inflation and infatuation of things, right?
Yeah. You gotta get to the heart of the matter, right? If you're very serious about actually gaining customers and keeping customers and growing a sustainable business over time, you have to pay attention to reality and to try to get at reality as much as possible. So I think, those three skills are really the top ones, for the job. I think if you want to go a little bit deeper, a couple of other things you might be able to go into would be studying like work systems, how to project management, how does work actually get done. Um, and then it would probably be good for you to brush up on law, just like legal, because you know how it is. Like you get lots of legal contracts, you have to decipher them, you have to negotiate them. If you're always running to your lawyers, like it's just going to be annoying for them. But if you can massage a contract to the point where you hand it to your legal team and they browse it over and they only have maybe, you know, ideally none, but maybe very very few red lines or negotiations, then that's good for you as well, and it's good for your legal teammates. But you should know what's in the law, and you mentioned it earlier, labor laws, etc. Right? Like how to, if you don't know what those are, you can't protect your people from abuse. So you should know what the laws are.
and that's being a leader that considers what happens with the folks that come work with him or her, around him or her, or under him or her. And I want us also to touch upon empathy and emotional intelligence, because now those are quite great skills over there, and I think this one is very popular these days. A lot of people talk about it. The reason I want to bringing in discussion is because I want to hear your version about these two together, instead of
Mm.
taking the general definition, because I believe they are kind of tailored and a mirror of someone's character.
Yeah, empathy and emotional intelligence. I don't like the term emotional intelligence, but I understand what people are trying to get at when they use it. For me, it's just I think the term I was most used to using was just, oh, that's a people person, right? Like they're really good with people, and there's a lot that goes into that. With
Hmm.
empathy, I think is certainly one of the keys, but you can't. Um, Empathy is not like a switch that you turn on,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of other things connected to it. You actually, and they're deeply personal things, which I'm not sure whether or not I can require it from someone in a professional setting. But what I would say is, I would hope that the people I hire would have enough of a developed sense um, of care for others and warmth that they would try to consider what kinds of effect that their words and actions have on other people.
I, based on what you said, I would even streamline it up to the event that, listen, if you had any tangency with Christianism, or go back into your religion, if there is something there that says, when you do something, don't step over dead bodies, considers other around you, or think of what would be your reaction if someone would behave that way, and don't do it, or do it then once you've vetted through this process. I think you have an emotional intelligence that is way better than others that know the entire theory.
Yeah, it reminds me of, there's this interview I saw once. I forget who it was, a very famous executive and then later on investor, but he was telling a story where he was interviewing somebody, I think for a VP role or something,
Mhm.
or maybe even a C level role. But he said in the interview that he asked a question about, oh, if you saw a baby on the street, like what would you do? And he got some kind of BS answer, and he said, sorry, like we won't be continuing the conversation because you should have just picked the baby up and held it and try to find where the parents are. Like it's not a trick question, right? And I think there's really something to that, that you're trying to, like, interviewing people, trying to find the humanity in the candidate, and and in the person, and for yourself, like developing that maturity where life is much more than just about your base needs.
Yeah.
Because I think what's being very like pushed right now through a lot of social media is like this, like narcissism and selfishness, as just says, well, get mine as soon as I can, as fast as I can, as much as I can, and screw everything else. And it's like, no, I don't ever want to work with somebody like that, and I don't ever want somebody like that with authority over me. That they're unworthy to hold like a leadership position, but we have so many of them today, and it's like this really big
Yes,
problem.
because we look at the results only. Those kind of characters might get to the numerical results, but that doesn't mean that if we look to their churn, the level of fear and stress of people working under them, the level of attrition, how people mistrust each other, or how they tend to manage that entire team, maybe we won't see any positive vibe from there, or positive thing or outcome,
Yeah.
but they still deliver results, right? And for some, that's all that matters.
Well, the reality is that they push other people to deliver those results, and what you get over time is, if that is what's being pushed down from the very top, you get a culture eventually where lies are everywhere, and you will have people stabbing each other in the back fairly often, especially at the top level. So your executives aren't building a long-term strategy for your company anymore. They're playing politics, and they're just trying to, push people to do certain things that are out of character, and forcing other people to have undue stress and shed their humanity. And we never ever count the societal effects for doing something like this. If every company takes this route, society suffers massively because no one will trust anybody anymore. No one will trust any information anymore. And then you get a reversion into tribalism because people will absolutely narrow the amount of, people that they can generally trust about anything. And we never count these kinds of, that's all considered collateral damage or an externality. which is like convenient technical speak for, yeah, you don't care about the fabric of society. You don't care what happens outside of that sheet where you get to bring home more money. That's not okay for society. And so I think the people at the bottom, or even in the middle, won't see the majority of that. And so you see a lot of symptoms right now where you have riots globally,
Yeah.
across a lot of the civilized West, and unionization here in the U.S. and for what I would consider to be very good reasons. It's because they can't take it anymore, right? And I think that's the inevitable road you go down when you manage business and do business in this kind of manner.
It's out there, guys. It's sad, but if each of us can change something for the positive over here, we invite everyone in this exercise, and that should be maybe more satisfying than any other achievements that day. That you did something better for your colleague and others working under you if you're a manager. Um, Coming back a bit to analytics and interpreting data, one piece of advice, I know we discussed this separately, but I'm going to bring it as a segue over here, um, is going to the trenches, right? If you want to get accurate data, if you want to read between the BS, go into the trenches. So, guys, don't just take the Excel sheet, go into the trenches. Now, so very interesting. I think we built our short list of what actually it takes for us to succeed in this industry. I'm sure there are many other ingredients over there in this babka that we actually forgot to put in, but hopefully it would turn out to be a very good cinnamon babka if we follow the recipe that we have in hand right now. But in terms of leadership, I'm going a bit in my area as a management consultant, and I tell people that when they ask, so look at this company. This is my company. What can you actually do to help my company, right? And without looking at anything, I just build a narrative in which I tell them, I am here to help you deal with the unpleasant, unwelcome, and unplanned events that will hit your business for sure. It's just a matter of time. And they look at me and they're shocked and say, oh my God, are you doing some sort of voodoo? Are you trying to attract some negative things within my business? And what I came to realize is that people always look at someone when they solve a problem with the idea of eradicating risk, but they neglect the fact that they might help them as executives navigate through risk. Because you cannot eradicate risk, right?
No,
If we could eradicate risk, there would be no need for Muri.
not if you're doing business.
No,
business equals risk.
yeah, and no matter how many textbooks over there we read or how many seminars we take, life is so unpredictable, and we don't even have to work or have a business to realize that it's
Correct.
unpredictable. One of our relatives can die or fall of a severe illness, and they never smoked in their life, right? So if that happens in personal relations, what about business? So I want us to discuss a bit on how you see things, the relationship between leadership and risk over here, and the idea of mitigating or navigating through risk.
I think you have to do both. I think, to your point, navigation is very, very underplayed right now, and it is so very needed because the world is only becoming more complex. We think about top line things like, generative AI, etc. So in terms of navigation, I think most leaders are very poorly equipped to navigate, especially due to the business school and business management trends that we have that love formulas. And don't get me wrong, formulas are good. I'm not trying to go on everything. And a lot of those fundamentals are super duper important to understand and to track in many cases. But the unpredictability of life and being able to respond appropriately in time. We just saw a catastrophe with COVID, right? I mean, what a disaster for most, like 99% of governments out there, right? Complete, incompetence. And that's because I believe there's been a ton of management influence that is way too linear and rigid and doesn't know how to deal with managing complexity. So, anyone listening, if you want a beginner's course on this, I can't think of a better person to recommend to you than a gentleman named Dave Snowden. He has a company called the Cynefin Company, and I've watched. He has a ton of stuff on YouTube, and I've actually worked with this company before on a couple of projects. I've hired them myself, and so really really great resource. But they teach a very easily understandable and digestible framework for you to approach complexity management that governments and militaries have now, I would say in recent years, really begun to dig into, just because it makes much more sense than something like a Six Sigma or something like that. That's very rigid and commercialized and I would say cultish in a way. And so I highly recommend that. And people who know me know why I recommend that to all my, I actually make my teams watch it. Like if you directly report to me, like you have to watch it. So there's all this stuff. So really dealing with it and complexity. Dealing with true complexity. Just to give a little bit of a sneak peek into that world, really has to do with the beginning is the admission that you don't know the right answer, and that's already hard for most executives. That you don't know the answer. Why? Because it's actually complex. There's no direct cause and effect. And so what you're going to have to do is run a bunch of parallel experiments and figure out what actually works and what doesn't. And something will emerge from that complexity that you can, after some time, after you understand it, yeah, you can simplify it. But in that moment where you don't understand, just admitting that you don't know is so hard for most leaders that I meet. Whenever I meet a leader that admits, I ask them a question and they admit to me they don't know, it's impressive for me. It's unfortunate, but it's impressive for me because I'm like, wow, you're actually an honest executive. It's very few of you.
It's very disarming at the same time, right? Because you're about to criticize their work, and there's no need for that, right? Because they completely confessed over there. But I'm sure those are rare occasions.
Yeah, they're rare, right? And so I, as a consultant, a lot of times I have to tiptoe around that, just to kind of test the water, see how they are. But I'm the kind of person who's going to bring it up. So I think you're wrong with this, or this is where you're making mistakes for sure. The other part of it, in terms of mitigation, is I think the world we know already, which is very, very kind of well documented. Versus like, cool, like you know what's coming, and then you can sort of prepare yourself beforehand. But mitigation can never prepare you for a disaster per se. Even I remember COVID as an example, right? Like I one of the things I asked from all of my partners was to review their BCPs, their business continuity plans, right? And I was like, wow, you guys have nothing in here for pandemics. And then on top of that, I said, you have nothing for massive like geopolitical strife, right? Or like riots. And they're like, it's like civil unrest, and they're like, what are you on about? And I'm like, yeah, civil unrest.
You weren't very far away.
the thing that comes after pandemics, and they're like, what are you on about? And I'm like, no, seriously, like civil unrest always comes after pandemics, and if you're gonna shut down economies for years, you don't expect any negative consequences. I mean, come on. But it just shows you, even in mitigation, there's very little like lateral thinking, critical thinking when it comes to even the mitigation. It's all very standardized, and it's not very comprehensive in many cases. And so we find ourselves, even in the cases where we should have a little something planned, very terribly prepared in general. And it's not like these people they're very smart. I'm sure they all have, like a lot of them have very high IQ. It's not about intelligence. It's about, really just being able to stomach the right questions and to be able to entertain different ways of thinking about the problem space, and really being willing to take a step out. And sometimes, yeah, your idea is going to be dumb. It's okay. Like, something we could learn from all of our own childhoods and from our children is to not be overly embarrassed to just say what we think. Um, I
Yeah.
think that's a terrible consequence of growing up, is stifling that inner voice too much. It's terrible. If you have a question, ask it. You know?
I hope you will put some of this in your book. I heard you're working on, on that book, and I look forward on it. And I know from other discussions with you that mitigating risk and navigating risk and sharing from your experience is it's a big part of it. Um, so I hope you will also touch the topic of radical candor and how that can backfire for a consultant.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can certainly talk about that.
Yeah, I have a couple of funny stories to that to actually
Yeah,
share. But um, you know, uh, let's now transition towards a scenario in which so we talked about us what we need to succeed. We found a client to represent. We actually brought in a vendor. Now we have to go back to our teams and the pressure of KPIs, digesting KPIs for someone working in the front line over there is tremendous. I've seen people break not because they can't do the job, it's because they just they get suffocated by looking at NPS and CSAT and average handling time, and they're completely unnatural. They fail and they're fired, and that's not fair. So um, we once touched the topic that I like to keep simple, stupid, and also encourage some creativity, and
yes.
then go back to the client and say, listen, you're not happy about the average handling time, but look at the NPS over there. We're doing a fine job. I'm sure your boss can cut some slack over there if he sees these results. But I want to hear from you. So what exactly do you try to do to make it easier for everyone to achieve these KPIs?
Um, a couple of things. I would say, um, number one is to slightly, because of the environment, to actually slightly de-emphasize them however I can. So if I'm on the
Mm-hmm.
client side, I try to say, yeah, we have targets, but I'm not gonna, unless like I'll set like a really low bottom floor, unless it like really drops beneath this, there's not gonna be any, so there's no financial penalties around it. So a lot of the, I would say, artificial pressure is off
Mm-hmm.
in the environment. Because something that always happens is if you put like really high targets and right at the edge, and then you push for financial penalties if it ever drops below that, you're actually in, for many game companies, they say, oh, we want you to be natural, we want you to just do the right thing or common sense. But then if you impose something so constraining as a KPI penalty, and you place it right at the edge instead of like way far away, where actually that's actually a problem and you're actually being negligent, then you get a lot of the dysfunctions that you see. And so a lot of clients don't see themselves as part of the problem, but a lot of times they are, because they're blindly pushing towards KPIs instead of,
Mm-hmm.
what I like to focus people on is the top line, which is what what what's the, I want people to have a great experience, and how am I going to define that? I want to make sure that we resolve any issues that they have, and any maybe adjacent or surrounding issues that are related to that issue. I want to make sure that they feel like if they have a complaint, that they were listened to, and that the person cares about their situation. I want them to be able to get back into the game as quickly as possible after all of those things are taken care of. And I want them to have as low friction as a service experience as possible. And that's what I care about. And so those are, qualitative. Those are ways of describing how you would like the experience to go, and to give people the freedom to be able to think about that on their own as reps about how they're going to provide that kind of experience, right? And so it's you really want to, for me and my teams, is focusing them on what is it that you actually want to deliver at the end of the day, and then let's see where the KPIs land when we're delivering that. And so the KPIs people forget, those are lag measures. Those are massive downstream lag measures. And so what you really want to do is pay attention to, your lead indicators and the things, the behavioral systems and processes and policies, etc., and the way you do quality, whatever it is, and training. You really want to pay attention to these systems that govern behavior, versus just narrowly focusing on get that number up however you can. Because if you just push that, you get cherry picking, you get all that dysfunctional other kinds of stuff that we see. You get people passing off.
It's not natural, right?
Cases,
it's not their fault. It's not natural, and you gave them a numerical target no matter what, disconsidering their feelings, their struggles, their blockers. So they're gonna give you that in return, and if you're gonna discover that they've cut some steps, taken some shortcuts, did some illicit things that can break that contract, it's no surprise. I mean, you should have seen that. As a please.
Yeah, correct. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, KPIs are important, and I always tell people, yeah, we have them, and they give us signals to where we should dig deeper, but they shouldn't be the end all be all, right? And some people it's really challenging because you need a performance management system in place, but at the same time, like, how you administer and how you conduct those performance evaluations really does matter. Yeah, you have to have one, but the manner in which you do it is also extremely important. And so sometimes people forget that, and they can't it's hard for them to process that certain performance management systems actually decrease in value over time as your operation matures and as the general performance level, kind of flattens out. It's much more about this other stuff that we talked about earlier, that'll help people get there.
One funny thing that comes in mind is I've taken over a new team, and I realized that they were quite scattered and in their way of working, and it was a mid-manager level team, and I asked them, "What is your biggest frustration? Why aren't you able to deal with your job and the responsibilities associated with it?" Because they were performing under. And they said, "The fact that others interrupt me." And I was laughing, and I said, "Well, that's the life of a manager. Others interrupting you is like saying I'm having cereals for breakfast, right?" But I asked them then, "What do you do first thing that you come in the office?" And back in those days, I was streamlining I actually managed to build a planner that, regardless of the teams that I'm working with, I have this planner, and we follow that planner so that we speak the same language. So the entire idea of that planner is, what must I remove as blockers for others at the beginning of the day so that I can work in peace, or as peaceful as possible. So the entire productivity has radically changed because I came at work as a manager, mid-manager, team lead, project manager, thinking and knowing what might erupt, and proactively sat down with the people in charge to actually prepare them for that moment, give them the tools of what is required, and surprise, surprise, they slowly gain half a day, and then about 65% of that day for themselves to actually do things.
Mhm.
And I think this goes back to not following, some sort of Lean Six Sigma methodologies. It's actually understanding that as a leader, you need to serve first and to eat last. And if you're not going to serve, you're not going to eat, because life will find a way to keep you busy continuously.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like you have to, as a manager, like if I was back managing frontline teams, the question that I generally ask my direct reports has held steady throughout my career, which is, what is preventing you from doing your job as best you can? And getting honest answers from my people, because everyone likes to complain.
Yeah,
And being able to then take that information and go get things fixed for my people, because whatever stands in the way of their productivity or getting the answers they need, or they have to wait on somebody else for 2 days because this is the way the process
yeah,
is, removing those roadblocks and coming up with ways, observing how people work, and seeing if there's a suggestion that I could make. Like this one time, this way long
hmm
time ago, one of my people had a habit of having YouTube on while doing their work, and I said, "Hey, can you try something for me? Can you just turn that off? And you can have music on, but don't have." There was like esports or whatever. I was like, no. No. I was like, hey, just turn that off. You can have music on or whatever background stuff you need. That's not going to bother you.
yeah,
But try not to have other people talking on, because the reality and the way that I convinced this person was, the reality, our brain has very small kind of bandwidth. We can't, and the language processing, like you can't be doing two language related things at the same time. There's no way. You can't talk to two people at once, right? That's why we always say, no. If if you have more than one kid, you're like, hey, just no, you go first. No, we just can't. It's an inability that human beings have, because of the way we process language. So it's just like, look, just turn that off. And yeah, I mean, things got much better for that person after that. But observe your team, how they actually work, make some friendly suggestions, ask them questions about what's getting in the way, observe, because sometimes they might not, because their routine, they might not know that
hmm
something's a problem. And so if you're watching them, you're like, wow, all of you have to open like 7 windows. This is ridiculous. Like, how about we get this down to like 2 or 3? Let's see if there's a way I can do that, right? And so you see it as an outside observer, as a manager, and you can go to other technical teams or your partner or whatever and ask for some help to get things improved, to make the work environment better. But yeah, that kind of like general observation and solutioning on behalf of your employees is always needed. I mean, good managers get things out of the way and help make people's jobs easier and more enjoyable and all of that stuff. Yeah.
And actually, this is a partial answer to my next question over here, because I was about to go and build a scenario with you in which we actually took a new project and we have to make a diagnosis of the health of our team, the health of our project, the health of our delivery capacity. And the first thing, based on, building on what you just said right now, what we're looking at is trying to understand how things are being done over there between folks. But what else, Tony, do you look at in order to understand where we are right now and how are we going to get where we actually want to be or can be?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One is the language that the team uses. I think is one of the early things I pay a lot of attention to. Is it primarily negative? Um, as it relates to work, how do they talk about customers that they're actually helping? Do they actually make fun of them? In some cases, I've actually seen this where there's like a wall That's really terrible practice. But how do they talk about customers? How do they talk about each other? How do they talk about work? And you can piece together a lot from that. What are the relationships like between the individuals on the team? Do you see people getting along? Do you see a niche, clique group forming? Do you see people excluding other people? Do you see someone conversely being extremely helpful? Do you see natural leaders in the group? Um, just paying attention to that dynamics. How are people interacting with each other, both during work and then both during their break times? Who goes to lunch with who, etc. All this kind of human relationship
Mm-hmm.
aspects. Um, what do they do after work? Do they ever hang out together? Do they know each other outside of the office or not? It's not required, but it's just interesting to know, to observe. Because a lot of times, like if you work with friends, work in general is stickier. There's all these like funny memes out there about your work bestie, and so those are important dynamics to at least understand and pay attention to. I would say as well, kind of the attitude towards work. Is it something? Who on the team looks at work as a craft to be mastered? Who looks at it just as a job, which is also okay as long as they deliver. Who just looks at it as a drag, right? Some people just hate their jobs.
What is a
And
bus until the next job?
right. All that kind of stuff, right? Is there someone like uncomfortably trying to curry your favor, even though you're new, etc. So there's all that kind of stuff. Just human stuff to pay attention to. The actual delivery too, right? We just talked about metrics, so yeah, I would look at those just as a marker, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily as the end all be all. But hey, is there anything here that stands out in the data, and not just the KPIs, but like if a company I think is doing really cares about its people, it will have additional data. It might be just qualitative observations, but they will have information about any team's general performance or behaviorisms, and it would be
Mm-hmm.
interesting to look at those and see what those have been historically and more recently. Um, yeah, and so the all of those things, their actual work, their delivery of those things is primary, but in addition to that is all of the human relationships within that team and how they talk about each other and their future in the company, right? Water cooler conversations and any memes you can dig up with
Chinese whispers.
yeah, it's very important.
Uh, yeah, I was looking over my notes over here with respect to what you were saying and what I was writing down, cascading this and then spillover topics that are not necessarily on our agenda, but I think they're interesting. Uh, I think that we look at this a very human centric characteristic to your management style, I would say, or consultant um, kind of style. But sometimes we have to take like harsh decisions,
Yeah,
and it involves like spring cleanup. And basically, in my role, this is something that I've never escaped. So it was like a necessary evil. It was like something that needed to be done. And I was curious to see if this is something that it's by default the standard in your industry also. Whenever you take a new client, do you have to start spring cleanup? Do you have to say goodbye to a few folks? Do executives listen to you when such radical decisions need to be taken?
yes, unfortunately. I'm not sure if I would say that it's evil in every single case. Um, I try not to do evil things, but I think I know what you mean by the sentiment. Like
Unpleasant. Okay.
it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to fire people because it means that they have to go out and search for something else. and they're going to have additional stress in their lives, and that's really hard. And it might, in some cases, it might be a really bad time to do so for them personally,
Yeah.
and we don't know about that, but it happens anyhow, and that's extremely unfortunate. But yes, it's been a part of almost every single consulting gig, unless it's like a fresh start, like they don't have anybody on the team yet.
Yeah, tabula rasa,
Uh,
greenfield
yeah.
starting.
You can get a clean slate, and that's fine. But in most cases, there usually are either a few, sometimes a lot, that do have to be let go. They do have to be fired, and you know, I would say that a lot of it is due. The core root that I've found in every single case is always leadership. There's either mismanagement, or there hasn't been enough performance management, or there's been some kind of negligence, or even just ignorance. So you had somebody you put into the position to try to do the job, but they actually had no context. So it's not their fault that they failed necessarily, because they were set up to fail. They didn't know what they were doing, right? And so sometimes that happens as well. But yeah, you have to let people go, and you have to have those difficult conversations. And a lot of times, people do have to be fired because they were technically, I don't want to make this a personal thing at all, but just incapable of handling whatever job that they were supposed to be doing.
Basically, it's a very good business card for their manager also.
Yes.
For me, it's always a package exit, because if that manager has actually failed so bad in building a team, giving him another chance after he's done that for 5 years. I don't really think in those kind of second chances. And okay, you might have been lucky,
Especially not if it's been like 5 years.
yeah.
I think there's enough,
But
there's
you
enough
would be
evidence to say
surprised.
you're not a good manager.
Tony, you would be surprised, and I'm talking about 300, 400, 500 million companies, annual revenue. How much does it matter to actually, rise in the company with the current executive at the same time, or be best pals within a department, or be the oldest in the department while being named a manager? But that doesn't mean you're gonna be a good manager. Uh,
No, relationships and nepotism are alive and
you
well
just
as long
mentioned
as
them,
human
yeah.
beings are alive.
You just mentioned them diplomatically at a very, entry level position, like looking at a team. But hey, guys, it's not only at entry level; it continues to be. So we gotta call that out with radical candor, and make executives take the decision that they had to hire us from the
Yeah,
beginning.
because it looks bad on them too, right? Like if you have a nepo hire and they weren't able to ever sort of get it together, and if you are the top leader and you don't do anything about that, people are fine with the rules or whatever laws that you have in place, so long as they're equally enforced to all people.
Hmm.
That's why we have the rule of law. And if you skew that mechanism in your own company, and it's very visible for everybody to see that you clearly are playing favorites and have nepo hires that are useless, and you don't do anything about it, you reduce your own moral standing and leadership authority within your own company. That will be the result. And the more you do that, the more people will not actually respect you, and the worse off your company will be. And so, it's just very clear. And executives aren't used to people talking to them in this frank a manner, but I'll say it. I'll say it. That is what you do. It's very normal. If you put yourself in the shoes of a very competent employee and you witness this kind of stuff happening, don't tell me that it wouldn't demotivate you. Absolutely, it's demotivating to have somebody above you who is technically incompetent and unable to do their job. It doesn't inspire confidence and leadership. And, you know, You can build your echo chamber if that's what you want to do with your money, but that will not build a lasting company.
Yeah, amen to that. That's so true. I was thinking of us going a bit back to the people working under us or looking at us for different solutions and ways to become better and more efficient and come with more joy at their workplace. And I wanted to ask you, which do you think are the best financial and non-financial incentives to actually get someone to excel in their role?
Mm. Non-financial, we'll start with that. It's a little bit easier.
Mhm.
We
Not many
know.
executives say that.
Yeah, what's interesting
Non-financial
is
is easier. That's kind of an antichrist over there. So
it is,
non-financial
it
is
is.
easier.
Well, it's easier in terms of the actual money and the fact that we know that intrinsic motivation is like very much stronger than extrinsic motivation. And so it's a little bit easier in terms of the capital requirement, but it has much more to do with investment from a mentor.
Hmm.
It could be your direct manager. Ideally, it would be, but it doesn't have to be. You can have more than one. And I've had the privilege of mentoring people outside of my department in various companies, and continue to do so even after we've left our work relationship. And that's wonderful. That really helps if someone feels like you can be a mentor to them. And I'm talking to all the older, experienced people out there. Like, give back your time, your energy to mentor someone can mean a world of difference to a young person, and it's
Or
really
maybe,
great
yeah,
to
or
do.
maybe you wanted this when you had the opportunity, could not find it. Now you see it in front of you and you ignore it, and making someone
Yeah,
else lead that same painful experience that you had.
correct, correct. And so you can really do a lot of good there. I think part of that is, when you build incentive programs, you could fill it with a lot of intrinsically motivating things. So it's time with, maybe there's an executive in the company that really has a tight schedule, but you've gotten them to agree to have an hour meeting, 30-minute or an hour meeting with, an entry level, employee that has performed well, to say, nobody gets this person's time, but you have an hour of it, right?
Yeah.
Like, people have to pay for this. Like, people are dying to have a meeting with this person in the company. You get an hour because you've done well, right? Like, programs like that, giving them books that the organization thinks is extremely helpful in understanding
Hmm.
the company leadership culture and how it works. So it's like, cool, leadership reads, like, C-level leadership reads a couple books together every year. It's like, cool, like, why don't you give those out? Like, the CEO has a top 10 read list. Like, great, why don't you give those, buy a bunch of those and give them out to employees when they do well? There's like these kinds of, you can invest in a certification for them because you're investing in their mastery. So it's like, yeah, it costs you a little money, but you know that's more intrinsic than it is extrinsic, right? Because you're investing in them. It's more about mastery and like them learning new skills, um, rather than the typical extrinsic stuff, which is, yeah, let me give you some money, right? I'll give you a bonus. I'll give you a video, in our world, I'll give you a video game system, right? You'll win a PS5 or whatever, or an Xbox, or you'll win a gaming PC
Hmm.
or whatever. And that's all fine. I'm not necessarily saying those things are bad, because I've you know given out those kinds of rewards before for top performers, but it can't only be that. I think it's really important to think about the other stuff as well. And even for the extrinsic stuff, I think it's really important that, like, you're careful about like how you distribute those. So even if it's like a financial bonus, right? Like, you got to think carefully about, like, maybe creative ways in which you could not be explicit about it up front, so that the people doing it for the right reasons, and then you give it to them as a surprise, right? No one's going to be upset about a surprise bonus.
No, I've never
You know what I
encountered
mean?
someone that
Like,
said, "Oh my God, I'm so shocked, I'm not gonna take it." Are
right,
you?
right. So it's a slightly different way to go about that fixing some motivation, but you because you were secretive about it, let's say up front, and you delayed the delivery of it, like it's, and then they're, oh, what the heck is this for? And then you have a conversation when you reward it to the person, they're like, oh wow, this is that was just them being them, right? And they
Mhm.
got rewarded for being themselves, for being diligent, for paying attention to the details, doing all this stuff, and you rewarded them for it. And I think that's a little bit better way of thinking about extrinsic stuff.
And I think when involving money is very standard. I think everybody can do it. But basically, you just broke it down into two scenarios. You either give them your time under the form of showing care, like a direct call with you or meeting with you, time with you, barbecue with you, thinking of them, sharing your books or anything else, or you have to give them more money. And that doesn't really show too much involvement. But I want us to touch a sensitive topic right here. Personally, I believe that a fixed salary is a guaranteed killer in this industry. Um, and I've seen frustrations after frustrations, some working hard, some working, just so that tomorrow comes and they get the same salary.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also seen situations in which new hires are paid better than the old hires or existing
That's terrible.
employees.
Yeah.
And I want us to talk a bit about these two realities.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that second scenario you mentioned just should not happen unless it's a completely different role, right? But if we're talking about the same role, that's just absolutely terrible. I think it's really important that companies think carefully about how they structure pay at their jobs, how they structure promotions, because I think most industry standards are pretty lazy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote best practice lazy templates, and there's not a lot of thought put into neither the the idea of motivation as a human thing, but also the specifics of the particular client company that's being considered. And so there's a number of different ways you could slice it, but there have been many proven experiments to show that there's and you could even take a cue from video games, I think,
Mm-hmm.
about how to think about progression and leveling up and how that actually works out in the numbers for the employees. There was this one study, I can't remember if it was a Zappos study or not, but it was something, I think it was Zappos. They said um, what they did was they took the old model for their call center and then they split all of the roles in half, like half the time to get. So it's like you split. It used to take 2 years to get here, but then you split it, and there's two different roles now, and it takes 1 year to get here and 1 year to get next. And even though the pay ended up being working out exactly the same at the end of the day, the happiness was much higher.
It was because you are climbing ladder, aren't you?
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
As time
You get a
goes
sense of
by,
progress. Yeah,
as time goes by, and I think career progression is something that is deeply underestimated as a need in terms of uh, getting employees and making sure they stay with you
mm-hmm.
um, for a few years, if not for a very long time. These days, honestly, 18 months, 2 years is quite a performance. So that's
Mm-hmm.
why I said for a few years. I consider that to be a performance. But do you see things the same way? I mean, it shouldn't be a fixed salary. It should be like a variable component over there. We should reward the proactive guys and the best performing guys. How do you see things over here?
I do think that there is, it's important to have a base expectation so that people understand what the base is. Bonuses might not always be available. It really depends on how the business is structured, but I would say it it needs to be both in terms of the formal structures, but then also in terms of additional value provided to the company.
Hmm.
And so, I think bonuses have always been warranted if you have someone who's just over delivering like crazy. I mean, why would you not? Why would that person not additionally earn more money? I don't understand. They help you, um, you know, in the BPO's case, they would help you, have a positive relationship with your client, most likely contribute towards the renewal, you know, um, all of these different factors, be a positive inspiration. If they have a good attitude towards the other employees, they would most likely, if they're a high performer, be naturally pushing up the employees of their teammates, by sharing, tips and tricks and just by helping out. And maybe they do some, ad hoc, casual,
Hmm.
on the job training, etc. So, like, why would you not reward this person just because your systems don't necessarily capture every single contribution they're making? Anyone with eyeballs can see that this person's delivering a ton more, right? And so, no one would be upset to know, like, yeah, you know, Jana got a bonus because she's awesome. And everyone's like, yeah, Jana's awesome. Like, sure, like,
And
oh, I want to get a bonus too. God, be like Jana. It's like cool, like,
and there are two things that can go wrong here. Either or one that could go south and one north, to say so. Either we
yeah,
take Jenna as a role model and we're gonna be more ambitious about doing that job, or we're gonna let Jenna burn as a candle, and one day she's gonna tell us that she's moving on, and we're gonna lose someone that was extremely valuable for that
yeah.
team.
For those two scenarios, I mean, I would encourage this mythical person to not burn themselves out, right? I do think that it's important that high performers become very aware of what their limitations are and that they're encouraged to take proper rest.
Very
But
sensitive here. Limitations, no
yeah,
one evading limitations. I mean, no, I think
right.
personally we struggle with that every day.
Yeah. People do, but I think, and this is part of a. I think humility is a very important virtue that has disappeared from society. And one of the things, humility doesn't mean being a doormat. It means being extremely accurate about your understanding of yourself and your place in the world and the limitations that you have, especially as a human being. And you're right. We don't encourage it. Every single thing out there on self improvement and social media is
Yep.
always telling you, that movie Limitless or whatever, like is always trying to, right, like optimize everything. You can't just eat anymore. You have to
No.
everything's you know what I mean?
I
Like
mean, you could
everything.
use six fingers of one hand. I mean, then seven.
Yeah,
But yeah,
you can't you, you can't even just take a shower anymore, right? Like you
no.
have to take a cold shower. Like anyway, so it's ridiculous. It is absolutely it's a parody. It's insane in some ways, and I'm afraid that it has made a lot of young people overly anxious and
Hmm.
insane because you have to think about everything, and unless you're autistic, you can't think about everything.
Yeah.
Like it's just going to be too much for you. And so I think humility is long due for a comeback in terms of a virtue that needs to be thought about, talked about, and explored much more often. But anyway, so that's certainly part of it of preventing. I've had extremely high performers on my teams that have directly
Hmm.
reported into me, and so I'll give them assignments, but the assignments are to relax. So I'll say, oh, you have to do something. You have to repick up a hobby. I remember
Wow,
giving this
this is
assignment
very
once,
interesting.
and so the fact that I phrased it that way made it easier for them to accept. And so for me, it's about, how do I adjust to this person's personality to get them to, and then I'll warn them too. I'm like, hey, burnout's real. You
Mm-hmm.
won't be effective if you do this to yourself. And I've been a hypocrite. I've done it to myself. And so I share with them, I'm vulnerable and say, I burned myself out before. Here's what happened. Here's how it felt. Like,
This is
just be
this is
careful.
where the
Right.
leader steps in, right? It's a combination between experience, creativity, and intuitivity, right? Ingenuity, right? You have to be able to foresee some things that some of the people that are walking those steps that you've been, as you said about the burnout, and as you said about the benefits of taking a hobby. You walk the walk, and now you can tell others about it.
Yeah.
So, Tony, I know we have just a few more minutes, and I have a few more questions for you. And one of them is, what do you actually look at from a potential client, or when looking out for a new mission, a new mandate, to say so? How do you evaluate and conclude that that client is the one to work with?
Mm, I think it has a lot to do with their the depth of understanding that they have for what they're asking for.
Mm-hmm.
What are their expectations? If they can clearly articulate those, I think is really key for me. And then just a very, very close second to that is, how do they have the maturity to understand that we are endeavoring on a human enterprise, and because it is human, it's going to be fraught with um, certain kinds of unpredictabilities and inconsistencies when dealing with human beings. It is not a machine per se in which you see a soda that is 200 milliliters that you're going to buy for X amount of money, and then you put the money in and you get the soda that you exactly what you expected to
With the
get out.
perfect mix.
Like you need someone who's mature enough and who cares enough about human beings to be able to allow for discussion, reasonable discussion, and reasonable flexibility in terms of how will we navigate value delivery to your business appropriately. And so if you have somebody with really clear, set of this is what I want, this is the description of what I need, they understand themselves and their needs very well, and they have that great, mature human element to say, okay, well, I know what I'm requesting from you is, that there can be quite a bit of variables in it, but I'm committed to really working hand in hand with you. I think that's great. There's another kind of potential client that's very rare, but if
Mm-hmm.
if if it's just somebody who gives you complete trust because of your reputation and your history of working with other clients and companies before, and they just say, please just take care of it, and I don't want to think about it right now because I don't have the bandwidth, um, then somebody like that, but they still have to have those two other things. If they don't have those two other things, like, I'm really hesitant to work with somebody because it's like, well, either you want something that's not real, and I can't deliver. I I try my best not to lie, so it's like, look, I can't give you something that doesn't exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking for utopia, I'm sorry, there is none, right? Human beings are extremely messy. I can't. The utopia doesn't exist anywhere. It probably doesn't even exist in your company. You're trying to enforce it upon me,
You're
right?
selling something you don't have in stock.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so you don't even have it. So why are you expecting it from me? And I just think that's unreasonable. It's an unreasonable. It's a tyrannical way of doing business. It's not a partnership. And if you think you can be a tyrant because you have a lot of money, I don't need your business. No, thank you. I would like to preserve my humanity and those who work for me. And so, you really have to have those two things. You have to know your business and what you need very, very well from your outsourcer and your consultant. And then you have to be very mature in the way that you understand human behavior. And the actual complexity and difficulty of what you're asking for your partner, which is to, work across lines and with other people who will inevitably see me as an outsider, but then also, building additional supplement to your teams that are
Mm-hmm.
going to be outsider teams, right? But, can we have that level of working together and actual partnership and information sharing that's going to make it successful.
Yeah.
So you really need those two things. If you don't have those two, I could care less about how much money you want to put in front of my face or whatever. I can't deliver that because you're asking for utopia, and that doesn't exist, and it's unreasonable, and that's a bad place to start off from. It's like you're hiring it. Yeah, they're a client and they'll pay you lots of money, but they're a tyrant. And
Yeah.
some places are okay with tyrant clients, like fine, but I don't have those aspirations. I'm very happy with the humble lifestyle. So I don't need to deal with it, right?
It might seem as science fiction what you just said, but I resonate very much with this process of filtering between clients and whom do you work with. And I think part of the past experiences that we had helped us build these filters, so they get us closer to the self-actualization moment within us, our profession, our personality. And now, one or two closing questions, Tony. Is this still possible?
Yeah. No worries.
I hear a lot to be nimble as an organization, to be agile. Before you laugh with tears over here, because I know why you're laughing partially at least.
Right.
I can't read your mind, but I know. Is because even when I tried this at a very, very small level, but what do I mean by small level? I went back and said, listen, if you are negotiating a contract with KPIs in the SOW set from the US for all geographies, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
It took 2 years for that to come true. I laughed when I heard, oh, but we were very agile, we were very nimble over here. And I wanted to ask you if you think that there are real differences in managing teams from one country or a different country, and we should tailor these KPIs in these SOWs. So if executives should actually take in consideration this.
Yeah, I think it's important. Like the only way you could set any kind of a global KPI is if they're effectively, the reason you set them is not to push performance to a certain level, but you set them just to make sure that it doesn't fall
Mm-hmm.
below a very, a critical level. That's the only way that I could see using global KPIs to be beneficial, because you're ignoring so many details. If you're running a massive, large, multinational corporation, um, a good way to stifle innovation and a good way to cripple your company is to try to come up with these over centralized business units and KPIs and governance structures, because look, the United States is not run well. Right, and that's like, look, large organizations, you want to over constrain in the wrong ways. It's You can have a few. I think what's best for large corporations, if you want to centralize anything, you could centralize heuristics.
Mm-hmm.
Heuristics aren't KPIs, they're just behavioral, like, hey, do these 5 general things.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to actually manage your business well, you have to pay attention to the realities of each of the geographies in which you're operating. And then once you get that data, you can set some reasonable targets. You don't set the targets beforehand. The targets should not precede the actual reality of what's happening in the region. That doesn't make any sense. I'll be like, okay, I want, five amazing resorts with swimming pools and beaches on the moon. It's like, sorry, that's not possible on the moon. um, like, it's like, okay,
Yeah, but I
well, I
wrote to
mean,
Santa.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so, the problem with a lot of this centralized planning is that it exists in a vacuum where you don't pay attention to the details, and the details actually matter when it comes to, again, building businesses that work and that work for a long time. Um, and if you want to retain great regional talent, and you want to frustrate people to, all hell, it's like, why? It's that old Steve Jobs line. Why do you hire smart people and then tell them what to do? It's like, didn't you just buy that company because you thought it was a great purchase? Why are you going to go in there and then force all this other like external stuff upon them without asking any questions?
Yeah, it was great before you bought it, but now you can ruin it because you own it.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
it's
right.
totally, yeah, it's totally safe. It's totally fine. So what you're actually saying is that this kind of tailoring is absolutely mandatory, and that you kind of encourage the feedback that's coming towards leadership and management to actually consider these cultural barriers factors that are needed out
Yeah,
there. And I would add on top of this that if they're not discussed in advance with the client, you're gonna you're gonna disappoint someone because that
yeah,
person
yeah,
was not educated and cannot foresee these results, and that's why they're coming to you as a partner, as a vendor,
yeah.
right?
You need the appropriate amount of authority at each level of management. And what's interesting is that if you push that to where it makes the most sense, you naturally flatten out your reporting lines, and you might save yourself a lot of money by having less like VP level executives, for example, that are just unnecessary. You have like executive bloat, it's very expensive. So something I've never understood about like hyper growth companies is like the mantra from senior leadership in HR is usually hire more senior leadership, but no one ever stops to ask, like, well, actually, do you really need that role? Because we built the business without it. So the question should be entertained instead of just taking for granted that you actually need necessarily all of those centralized bureaucracies, right? I think that makes companies unnecessarily bloated and heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you end up cutting from the wrong space later on because they cloud your vision. If you have bloated executive management, what happens is your vision gets clouded as a C level because you get all this biased information presented to you that tries to make each of them look good because they're all waiting in line for you to leave, right? Um, and
Yeah.
or maybe not.
Well,
Some
I
of the
think there are going to be a couple of VPs, listening to this that won't feel very satisfied because they might have a imposter syndrome over there and actually acknowledge that there's no real need for them in that company.
right.
We don't want to
If they
upset
do,
anyone. We don't want to
yeah.
upset anyone, but maybe they will find a purpose or build the niche that is needed over there to justify their
Yeah,
layer.
well, I would encourage them to, just look for value delivery. But if there's not, I would actually encourage them to go, because I've done this before for myself. Like, go find something that is actually more fulfilling, where it's not just about collecting a paycheck. I mean, unless that's your strategy, then I'm sorry. No, I don't.
We don't
Yeah,
judge. I
yeah,
think the advice you gave was for someone of a different personality.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I subscribe to that, but it's not everyone has a stomach for it. But for me, finding purpose in what I do is the most important and most satisfying, and bringing added value to the table over there
Yeah.
rather than getting that paycheck. And the closing question for you today, Tony, and thanks for heroically resisting. This is 2 hours of continuous talking on this topic. So I think no one can doubt by looking at this that we're not passionate about what we're doing. The closing question is: how do we deal with executive egos in this kind of role? What
Mm,
tips do you have there for me and others? Because the egos are pretty inflated.
yeah. I would say it would be really wise to study up on the client that you want to have or that you're you're thinking about trying to persuade to hire you, try to understand their personality really well by not only what they've said publicly, but any actions you can see they've taken. Maybe they've, bought up a lot of uh, natural wildlife preserves. That maybe they've donated a lot to an orphanage. There's other things that they've done in their life that
Mm-hmm.
could be informative about their personality, and just really try to understand them as a human being. And for those who have really pumped up egos, um, I would say the wisest thing would be not radical candor, but trying to find reasonable ways in which to positively present the reality of the situation that you see, and to really focus not so much, if you're ever going to mention a problem that you see, is to really focus the energy on the solution. So you're going to mention it. It's always going to be there in the background in your back pocket, all the details of the problem if you need to describe it. But executives are very busy, and if you can focus in on the solutions and how it helps them achieve what they want to achieve. So understanding what their strategic goals are for
Mm-hmm.
themselves and their career goals are really going to help you kind of cater to their personality, and making sure that you're keeping the conversations focused on value delivery for them and their career and what they're trying to deliver for their company, their shareholders, whatever it is. Then you can focus in on those positive things. Yeah.
Yeah, guys, and something from a consultancy point of view, consulting role, the objective is not for you to always be right in spotting out what was done wrong. The objective is over there to, get hands together, don't point fingers, roll the sleeves, and work together to actually eliminate, or reach a certain objective over there. So that's why you were hired. Tony, thanks so much for today. I really enjoyed this conversation. Appreciate the golden advice. And please let me know when that book comes out so I can buy a copy.
I will. Thanks, Darius. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye bye.